My name is Carolyn Madden, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County and the Juvenile Justice and Justice for All Advocacy Committee. Welcome to our online forum featuring Michigan State Senator Jeff Irwin of the 15th District of Michigan. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County, which is a nonpartisan voter education organization encouraging informed, active participation in government. So as you heard, this will be recorded, and questions please put in the chat box and we'll respond to them at the end of the slightly more formal question and answer period. Okay, so I'm going to be your moderator today, and the focus of today's session will be on juvenile justice. But before we get to the specific questions on juvenile justice, I would like to ask Senator Irwin how you're doing and how you're doing during this busy time, and how do you think justice in general is faring in this lame duck session?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. It's a sort of an odd position for me to answer that question because last night we were in session until this morning, and we passed a number of bills, that I think were very, very important. And I think I got home about a little over an hour ago. So I was able to quickly try to get a little nap. But I guess the number one thing I'm feeling right now is tired because, I left home yesterday morning and didn't get home until about 9 a.m. this morning. But that's good though, because we were able to do a lot of different bills, and I think and that's why I'm there. So I was happy that we were there all night, but I'm a little tired right now. So I think the question though also was, how would I rate sort of this session of the Michigan legislature with respect to criminal justice issues? And it's a bit of a challenge because the previous session to this one wasn't a very productive session on criminal justice. Yeah, so we passed the juvenile expungement legislation and clean slate and some other important reforms, raised the age. And so I think there was a lot of momentum on those issues, and that momentum really slowed down, frankly, at the beginning of last year when Democrats took control. And that was frustrating to me, but I also understand why. We had a situation where, because Democrats were in control, the Republicans who used to sometimes cross the aisle and be helpful on criminal justice issues were no longer willing to be helpful. And I think the Republicans really seized on crime and fear of crime, as well as fear of immigrants and other people who are different. That was a really key cornerstone of the campaign. Obviously, there's a lot of different issues that were driving people in the election, but leading up to the election, the Republicans were hammering those issues. And when you see the ads that they put out on national candidates, they often focus a lot on crime. And when it comes to local candidates, that's also true. So I think a lot of the Democrats were afraid that, okay, the next fall they're going to be running against, soft on crime and criminal justice issues. And they were afraid of that. And as a result, we didn't get as much done as I would have liked to. Having said that, there are a number of bills that moved just in the last week, and I'm hopeful that some of those can get done. For instance, I mentioned juvenile expungement. That was actually my legislation from a few years back. I saw that folks were moving expungement for adults, and I had an opportunity to run into some folks from Michigan Center for Youth Justice and an old friend, Mary King, who pointed out to me that, hey, look, they're doing this expungement for adults and not for kids. And so we got in there and did that. But there was a little hole left in there. And so just last night, we passed Senate Bill 970, which is an add-on to that juvenile expungement legislation. We called it redemptive rehabilitation. Senator Santana led the bill. And what that does is that gives a path for folks who have been maybe committed the crime, someone who committed the crime when they're juvenile, and then they've gone 15, 20 years plus. So a lot of folks who are in their 40s or 50s now, and they haven't reoffended, but they still have this juvenile record from way back then. But they have a juvenile record for one of the crimes that was not automatically expungible under my legislation from a few years ago. So we expanded that. That's one thing we did. And then the other things that are still alive here down the stretch of lame duck are some of the bigger things that were rolled out at the beginning of last year when folks, I think, were more hopeful on these issues. Things like second look legislation, things like my legislation to end juvenile life without parole. Those are, some of the things that I'm hoping we can still get done before the end of the year. One thing I will say though is that a lot of the bills we passed two years ago, for particularly raise the age that deals with juvenile justice, one of the concepts that was included in that was the idea that we would incentivize local governments to adjudicate juvenile cases such that the juveniles who were being adjudicated had more community-based programs that they were participating in rather than out residential programs or other programs that might be out of the community. And we certainly allocated the budget dollars to to make that happen and to make sure that was a funded effort. So all right, I've been going on for a little while here, but frankly, it was a disappointing session on criminal justice so far. We still have another week or so to squeeze out a win on some of these other items. And that's where we stand right now.
Okay, well, we'll do some more on juvenile justice, but if, something comes up that you want to comment on, feel free to do that. One of the questions was what challenges, you've mentioned some of the challenges, but do you anticipate in implementing the Justice for Kids and Communities Act? And, is there data collection system in place to collect some real measurable improvements?
Well, I think one of the challenges is the data. Michigan has a mess of a criminal justice data collection system, not just for juveniles, but for adults as well. Our system is incredibly balkanized. Every county has their own system. And there's been some work over the course of the last couple of years to try to standardize some of those practices so it's easier to compare one county to another and things like that. But that hasn't really happened. There's also been a statewide effort that's been going on for at least 15 years, maybe longer, to try to create a unified state court record management system. And it continues to struggle for various reasons. JIS, Judicial Information Systems, JIS 2. I don't know if we're on JIS 3 yet, but what I do know is that the counties are not all adopting that system and using it so that we could actually have good data. That's one of the reasons why when the jail and pretrial task force got put together a few years ago, they spent a ton of time and money just trying to get the data on what's happening in our jails and what's happening in the local criminal justice systems because the data is all over the place. The data is a big problem itself. We need to fix that. The problem is that what we should do, in my opinion, is we should follow the trial court funding task force recommendations from, I think, 5 years ago, maybe a little longer, that said that the state should take this over. The state should take over the funding of court record systems, and we should have one unified system. We could save a lot of money at the local government level by unifying it if the state were willing to step in and help with that. It was something that, I've been fighting for the last couple of years, particularly when we had some Biden bucks that were, creating some surplus in the state government, and we had an opportunity to do it, but it never became a priority. So here we are. So the data is still a big problem. The other thing that I think is a challenge in implementing that legislation, which, if I remember the name correctly, is this whole concept of raise the age. And I was just talking about a second ago about keeping young offenders in the community, because we know that if they stay in community-based programs, they're more likely to be successful. We also, and also we know that if you send them to a program outside of the community, then when they come back, they're right back in that soup that may have been part of what led them to do what they did. And so by keeping them in the community, you can work on that rehabilitation and refocusing in the environment that they're going to be in so that it has a better chance of sticking. Okay, having said that, these programs are important, but they have to be stood up. I mean, somebody has to run these programs. Somebody has to cite these programs. Somebody has to work at these programs. And so that's the challenge, I think, at this point, is building out that infrastructure of sufficient community-based programs to be able to route everyone that except for those rare cases that may not be possible through through that system. So anyway, those are a couple big things: the data, and then just like setting up the programs. I know that when I was a county commissioner, going back, a long time now, 15 years or so, that was one of the big struggles we had at the Washtenaw County level. Was even before the state started incentivizing a higher reimbursement level, we were trying to stand up these programs. It's a tactical challenge to set them up and run them.
So just to go back to that, what's the reason do you feel that the state is not willing to take it over? Is it financial or is it bureaucratic?
I mean, not willing to take over. What is your question? That why the state's not willing to take over the data, or do you mean why the state's not willing to take over the funding of the programs that juveniles are adjudicated into?
You were saying that you would like the state to take over, so there'd be equality throughout the programs, throughout the counties, and you were suggesting that you wanted the state to run the programs.
Oh no, I don't want the state to run the actual community-based programs that the juveniles are being sent to as part of their case. What I do think would take a burden off our local governments and give us better vision on what's happening in the criminal justice system would be for the state to take over the data management, create one court record system, and impose that on all the courts and pay for it. Why isn't that happening? I think it's not happening because imposing something on the courts is something that they don't like, even if it's something that they like, and it's expensive. It's very, very expensive, and there's so many other priorities. Right. I just saw, my good friend Audrey Anderson posted something about reentry. What about reentry? Well, that's expensive. We've been fighting for reentry resources ever since the state walked away from the Michigan Prison Reentry Initiative, and so it's just a resource issue, and it's really hard to invest those long dollars in a system like that is not really inspiring to anyone. When you have an opportunity to invest in something new and different, and then you're comparing a court record system, which may be very practical and long-term helpful and save money for your local governments and be more efficient, you're comparing that to something that's just more emotionally resonant. The more emotionally resonant issue often carries the day.
Yeah, well, helpful to understand what the psychology of all this is about. Okay, the next question. Was the October 1st implementation date sufficient time to allow for the state to provide the increased reimbursement to the counties for community services and for courts to adjust to the changes? Is implementation being enforced?
So was the implementation date appropriate, or I think your question was more along the lines of did it give the state enough time to be able to support the efforts at the county level? I think so. I mean, really, the state's part is the less complicated part of the arrangement. We provide money. Right, we provide money, and I think the harder part is just what I said a second ago: is how do the counties take advantage of that incentive? And that is a little harder because they got, like I said earlier, they got to set up those programs. And do you think it would be useful for me to even explain the whole context of what we're talking about with this incentive, or does everybody already know what we're talking about?
I suspect the audience doesn't, so that would be helpful.
Okay, so Michigan has. Yeah, I'm sorry. Michigan has something called the Child Care Fund. And the Child Care Fund is a relationship, and it's governed by a statute between the local units of government, the local courts, and the state. And the agreement, as long as I've been involved in government, so at least going back to 1999, is that the state pays half the cost and the county pays the other half the cost. The idea was that these judges are sending juveniles to programs. They may be at varying levels of expense. And if the state is covering full freight, they're not going to worry about sending them to the most expensive program. By having the state and the county share the costs, well, then at least they've got a little bit of skin in the game, and we're going to share the cost with them. We'll pay for half, but there's a little bit of cost control there by having the counties, who are the ones who are ultimately deciding what the programs are and how much they cost. They have to pay half of it. Well, several years ago, some folks came in and they said, "How about this? Let's incentivize the choice on behalf of a juvenile court judge and court administration to use community-based programs. Everything I was saying earlier about how kids staying in the community makes the programs more successful, better for public safety. Everybody recognized that. That's what all the research says. So how do we make that happen, I think was the question. And the idea that was implemented that we've been talking about is let's change that mix from 50-50 to 75-25, and the state picks up 3/4 of the cost, the locals pick up 1/4 of the cost if that youth is in a qualifying community-based program. So that's kind of the context for what I've been talking about. And thanks for taking a step back, because that's what I mean by it's easy for the state to provide the additional dollars. The hard part is for the counties and the juvenile courts at the county level to find, develop programs that then they can send kids to on a community-based level, which this has been an effort in Washtenaw County for a long time, but now it's accelerated now that there is an incentive for them to do that, a financial incentive.
Right. Good. Okay, this is your response to the legislative changes not eliminating the detention of children for technical violations of probation or for status offenses, even though that was recommended by the task force.
Yeah, I think that the task force made a number of great recommendations. I would have loved it if we could have implemented every single one of them, but based on the politics of Lansing, talking to members, trying to divine the sense of the bodies, the decision was made to limit it, and in hopes that would allow it to actually pass, and just to kind of stomp my feet on this a little bit and relate it to what I said earlier about how this session has been not as productive as I would have liked on criminal justice issues. The Democrats took control of the legislature in Lansing for the first time since 1983. And in the Senate where I work, the Senate was in continuous Republican control from 84 until last year. And when we took control by a 1-vote margin. Same thing in the House. It's 56 to 54. So if they lose one vote, if we lose one vote, the legislation's dead. And so that's why we've struggled with second look. That's why we struggled with ending juvenile life without parole, is because it only takes one member to say, I'm a little worried about how this could look in my area, or I just don't agree with this. I think it's too this or that. And all of a sudden we're stuck in the mud. And so there have been a lot of efforts to try to find those potential traps politically and do everything we can to get around them. And so one of the tactics has been to jettison items that are good but just not politically saleable. And frankly, I'm not sure exactly why or what conversation drove that decision, because it was upstream of my involvement.
So I just to get back to that, and maybe we'll have a question about it that people that know better. But my understanding is that at the adult level, a lot of the technical violations have been not eliminated, but people don't get called back in for technical violations. So I'm a bit surprised myself that this is for juveniles, where that would even be more of concern, that they would be pulled back in for technical violations. So it's just a little surprising to me that that wasn't considered at that time, since for adults, they are actually advocating for that at some levels. So. Okay.
Yeah, just a brief response to that. Everything I've done in juvenile justice has been a bit of a surprise to me, because I have the exact same intuition that I think I just heard you expressing, which is that if the rule for adults is X, well, shouldn't the rule for children be less restrictive, right? And that it doesn't seem like that's the case. And and you'd think that the politics of it would be such that juveniles would be more compelling, more I don't know, easier to vote for. But in some cases, that's not the case. I'm not sure exactly why, to be honest. Sometimes I hear about, folks who are worried about, these youth becoming, extra violent and more so than the past, even though I don't think that's true. There's a messaging line that the Republicans, I think, use, which is that, you're emboldening and enabling this behavior by being so lax. I I agree with your intuition, but that's not really what I've seen in the chambers.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, another question. Your thoughts on another reform establishing an Office of the Child Advocate, which will be responsible for investigating complaints about juvenile justice facilities, including detention facilities.
Yeah, I think this is great. This is another one of the things that we were able to move forward on this year, and largely because of some of the high profile problems that were happening in Wayne County with their detention facility. I don't know if you remember those stories, but there was a number of very grisly stories about what was happening in the Wayne County detention facility. And we had some hearings on that, and this was part of what came out of that. I think it's a good idea independently, sort of like we do with our long-term care ombudsman for seniors. It's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect advocate, but it's great to have those eyes and ears and a group of people who are dedicated to follow up on these cases and to validate them. Sometimes, that can be sometimes what's necessary to get folks to take action on them. The biggest issue, though, in Wayne County, from what I could tell, was that they were, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for them, but they were just really struggling to get staff. And it was interesting, as they struggled to get staff, that really pressed the staff they had in ways that led to there not being eyes in places where there should have, and maybe people doing things because they were stressed, and maybe them not being able to cycle out employees who were not optimal because they were so desperate. And so my understanding is that that's gotten better, but I don't live in Wayne County or represent it, but I know it was a big priority for Senator Santana, and that's why we did that legislation. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, what pending legislation, well, you've mentioned some, but legislation that you support related to juvenile justice reform that the league could be pursuing and supporting? Can you have some, I mean, I know you've expressed some of the challenges, and the challenges are even going to be greater, I suspect, although I don't know what you're saying is that, with the Republicans, will there be more negotiation, do you think, or compromise? Or at any rate, the question is about where should we be going in the next 2 years while you're still in office, and what should we be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, zeroing in just on juvenile specific items, the number one thing that's top of mind for me is ending juvenile life without parole. There was a case, Miller v. Alabama, several years ago, and then there were subsequent cases at the federal level and here in Michigan, which the names are not at the top of my head right now for those cases. But essentially, what the courts have said, both at the national level and at the state level, is that sentencing a juvenile to life without the opportunity for parole is cruel and unusual punishment. It's unconstitutional. And we've been struggling to realign our statutes in a way that would, I think, reflect that decision in a way that is more true and honest. I mean, essentially what's happening now is that all of the juveniles who were sentenced to life without the opportunity for parole are filing to get hearings, and they're trying to get out or get resentenced. And, of the, I think about 350 of them that were, in the system back when this all first hit, there's, I think, about 100 that are still actually bouncing through the court systems and still waiting for their cases to be resolved. And it's been 10 years. That's crazy to me. And so, but what courts are doing is they're trying to kind of mishmash the federal ruling in Miller and our current law, and they're just basically saying, okay, well, the Miller ruling said we couldn't just sentence them to life without parole, but if we have a hearing to consider whether life without parole is a good idea, well, then it's okay if we have a specific Miller hearing to sort of satisfy the terms of the U.S. Supreme Court decision, and then it's okay to continue life without parole for juveniles. And most of the prosecutors have pushed for that for the juveniles that are in their systems. But it's not how I want to fix it. I think that is not really reflecting the true meaning of the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Miller. And so what I think we should do is I think we should end juvenile life without parole. We should instead have a term of years that for very serious crimes might be a very long term of years, but that ultimately give them a chance to get in front of the parole board and make their case about how they've been rehabilitated, make their case about how they're a different person at 40 than they were at 17. Make their case about all the things they've done inside and all the things they've set up outside to be successful. I think they should be able to do that in front of the parole board. That's why I've introduced my legislation, which says, as introduced, it says they would get a chance to go in front of the parole board at 10 years. Most states allow that at 15 years, a few at 20. And so we've been trying to work the last couple of years to get that up and over the line to the governor's desk because I think if we landed with a policy that was similar to some of our neighbors, that would be appropriate, and it would really reflect the ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court. One of the interesting discussions, though, within that is that the Michigan Supreme Court, and I don't remember the name of the case off the top of my head, but the Michigan Supreme Court essentially said it's not just under 18; it's actually under 19, and they've continued to hint that maybe that should even go up to 25, because there's all this research about that's when the brain is more fully formed, and people who are younger than that maybe shouldn't be as accountable for their decisions or something like that. And so that's been an interesting part of the fight, because now there's a whole group of people who are saying, well, the Michigan policy should say that this no life without parole extends all the way up to 25. But that becomes very, very controversial within the legislators. And as I said earlier, if there's a single Joe Manchin, if there's a single Kristen Sinema on any issue, it's dead, right? Just like we saw the Build Back Better agenda get stopped in its tracks by just one or two members. Same thing can happen with anything. And so, as Rep. Amos O'Neill, who has really been my counterpart in the House working on juvenile life without parole, as we've been working on it, that's been one of the challenges, is trying to reconcile those different ideas about what's the right policy. I did not mention that, no, but it passed. If I would have had a little more time to get myself in order, I would give you a better update as to exactly where it stands, because as I said, there were many dozens of bills flying last night, and I know we passed that. What I don't know is that the very final stage for that legislation? Having said that, even though I'm getting kind of wrapped up in the technicalities of hasn't been delivered to the governor, is it totally done? I think what happened last night was that the Senate voted in favor of that bill to make sure that juvenile offenders are afforded some sort of right to counsel. That passed, and it was a House bill, so it already passed the House. So even if there are some technical things for us to work out between the two chambers, I think the fact that it's passed in both chambers shows that that's something that's going to end up on the governor's desk before the end of the year.
Yeah, so all that has to be worked out in the next couple of days, though, right? And then it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I was getting wrapped up in when I first started answering your question. But sometimes I get a little bit bogged down into the, procedural details, which I don't think anybody really cares about. I think what you really want to know is it going to get done, or where does it stand, or what does it say? And, essentially years ago, about 10 years ago, we developed this Michigan Indigent Defense Council, which set standards for sort of what was quality defense across the state. And that was a good thing. And I supported that back when I was in the House. And I think it's done some good things to roll out standards. Well, we never did it for juveniles. And this sort of starts to bring juveniles into that fold. And this is something actually that Senator Schenck has been really focused on. Senator Schenck represents sort of the northern half of Washtenaw County along with me. And she's been a real leader on pushing this. I just wanted to mention her because this is one of the issues that I care about, but I really recognize that she's exercised some extra leadership on this. She's been speaking out about it in the caucus and speaking out about it in budget conversations about how this is something we really need to be looking out for. So kudos to Senator Schenck. The other thing I'll mention about the Michigan Indigent Defense Council, which I just can't not mention because it's just like a little thorn in my parochial claw or foot or whatever it is, which is that when that Michigan Indigent Defense Commission was started, essentially what they did is they looked across the they developed a high standard. What is appropriate representation? And then they looked across the state at the different counties, and they noticed that there were really only a couple counties that were doing it right. And Washtenaw County was one of those counties. And they looked at how much Washtenaw County was spending per defendant, because that was one of the big standards. And they said, oh, that's a pretty good number. So let's bring everybody else up to that number. And you know how everyone else got brought up to that number? The state kicked in the money to bring them up to that level. So those communities whose county boards of commissioners were not willing to invest the local dollars to comply with the U.S. Constitution and our fundamental rights, to be fairly representative and to be innocent until proven guilty, because they were failing in their obligation to meet those costs with resources, they got bailed out. And so once again, I voted for that. I think it was the right thing to do. I believe in indigent defense. Just because Wexford County or Ogama County isn't, doesn't make it a priority, wasn't going to stop me from voting for it. But I will say that when this juvenile one came around, we made sure that the way it's designed is not just to, like we always do, kind of punish the communities who were doing it right and only help the communities who weren't doing enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to that bill. So just to finish up on the other question, though, before we get to the questions, we do have some questions. Any other juvenile issues that you want us to pursue, or the juvenile life without parole is the big one, and we should keep?
I think that's the big one, it may still get done before the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, we're going to find out today. The House is meeting today. The last chance for juvenile life without parole, second look, and a number of other things we care about a lot, is today in the House. And if the House passes their House bills over, they're still alive in the Senate. And I know that we're really, really close to getting the votes we need on those bills. But the Republicans who used to support us have started to evaporate. Last night we did legislation on police accountability to try to improve the practice of policing in Michigan, improve police training, ban no-knock warrants. Well, not ban no-knock warrants, but put limitations on them. Basically, require you to get a judge to sign off on that and determine on the record that there is exigency and a real need for that. A duty to intervene bill, and some legislation that would say that when an officer violates someone's civil rights or gets some sort of violation on their record, that it sticks on their employment record longer, and that future departments who might want to employ that person would see those major misconducts. We used to have a lot of bipartisan support on those. Last night, we were only able to pass a few of those concepts out of the Senate. And I'm hopeful that the House is going to be able to follow through on them. But the changing political atmosphere in Lansing has evaporated some key conservative support that we were counting on a few years ago, when it felt like there was a little bit more bipartisan activity on this. So I kind of doubt jail WAP's going to get done, and I kind of doubt second looks can get done, and those are a couple of things that I think should be top of mind going forward. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So Belinda, did you have your hand raised? Were you anxious to say something in response? I saw Belinda Doolin's hand raised. No. Okay.
It wasn't raised. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Jane, you want to start with some of the questions for Jeff?
Sure. And thank you everyone for putting questions in the chat. Jerry Walden asks, will Michigan have a juvenile age of at least 20 for life without parole? Is that in the works?
Yeah, so I talked about that a little bit already. It's a big debate, right? And as you all know, politics is the art of the possible. And, we're struggling right now to end juvenile life without parole for 19-year-olds and younger. There's a lot of interest in pushing that number up, but when you push that number up, you risk losing support from some of the folks who are on the edge of this. And, as those kids get older and older, I think they enjoy less and less sympathy from, adults who might be more of the mind that a 17-year-old is a child, but a 21-year-old is not. And so that's really what we're struggling with. I think, as I said earlier, a lot of, the research is showing us that this is probably, an appropriate direction to go. But I think that the challenge is political. And I'll just say for myself, I've seen a lot of people push for 25. I'm not even sure I'm there yet, and I'm one of the biggest supporters of criminal justice reform in Lansing. I'm not sure if I'm quite to 25 yet. So anyway, right now we're working on 19 and under.
Okay, Belinda, thank you for this question. Given that Washtenaw County has many youth and family-focused programs, is there discussion between state and county on equitable criteria to be as inclusive as possible? And there's a second part to that. Some effective programs may not have the research behind it yet, and the organization can't afford the evaluations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wasn't really sure where you were going, Belinda, until that last part.
I'm
Well,
thinking about the child care fund specifically.
yeah, and I mean, I guess the first thing I want to say is that if you're noticing concerns or issues specifically, or or if there are barriers to getting these programs approved because there's somebody in Lansing who's saying that, well, there isn't enough research on this to allow it to be part of the 75% reimbursement, please communicate that to me. That's something that I would love to work with you on, because I just don't know I don't know the tactical details of what what the state government, the state administration is doing in terms of calling those balls and strikes at the local level and saying some programs are okay and some are not. Happy to work with you on that. And if I understand what's embedded in your question is this question of equity and access that I know was at top of mind when I was on the County Board of Commissioners, and we were talking about, how do we support some of the serial do-gooders, some of the great nonprofits in our community that are doing such important work. And there was always a bit of a push-pull in terms of, well, do we support new organizations that are doing cutting-edge things that maybe don't have as much backing, and that or that are like super community-based, and as a result, they're not wired into some academic approach. How do we support those kinds of things when they're good, but also make sure that we have standards and that the programs we're investing in are good ones and they work and all of that. And so I think it's a constant tension. It's one that I'd be happy to wade into with you and get involved with the decision making at the state level. So that's about all I can say about that, except for it does give me an opportunity just to remind everybody, and hearing from Jerry Walden reminds me of this as well. A lot of the conversation I have with residents is about bills and budgets. We're always talking about this law or that law. But one of the things that I spend a ton of time on, and as a really important role for legislators, is working the back end of the system, right? You try so hard to pass a law, you do the committee hearings, you're out there saying this is a good law, we should pass this law, but then the law goes into place, and what do you do to make sure that you continue to drive through what it was you were intending with passing that law? So that's an interesting and fun part of the job, and I welcome it in this specific area if you've got a trail of breadcrumbs for me.
Audrey Anderson has some applause, and she asks also, can you speak about the bill to expand the ombudsman role in the penal system?
Yeah, so right now, we have a corrections ombudsman who, well, there's an actual person who's the corrections ombudsman, but he has a team of people who work with him to investigate concerns on behalf of the legislature within the Department of Corrections. And there's this interesting relationship that the corrections ombudsman has with the administration, because the ombudsman and his team are all legislative employees. Actually, they're hired and fired and employed by the legislature, but they have this access relationship with the Michigan Department of Corrections where they can go into facilities. They don't have to provide notice. They can go in there and do investigations. They can talk to people. They can sample. One of the big things that we've sent the ombudsman out multiple times for is to check on concerns around the cleanliness, and particularly concerns around mold at Women's Huron Valley. Women's Huron Valley happens to be in my district, so I take a special interest in trying to make sure that the folks who live there and the folks who work there are treated fairly, because those folks who live there, they're my constituents. They can't vote, but they're absolutely my constituents, and I try to take that seriously. So, all right, so that's what the corrections ombudsman does generally. And they're a really valuable resource for us. They, sometimes they're not helpful solving problems, but sometimes they are, and that's a great resource to have because the prisons are such a difficult environment to get into. So the question that Audrey asked was, what did we do, or what's on the table? Well, what's on the table is some legislation to expand their authority around testing inside of facilities. I think this idea, if I understand it, came from the experience we had with the scabies outbreak at Women's Heron Valley about 5 or 6 years ago, 5 years ago. And what happened in that case was that the the women at Women's Heron Valley were complaining about these rashes, and they thought it was what it was, scabies. They were complaining for a long period of time. I don't remember how long, but it was too long. And we couldn't actually send in a medical professional because the ombudsman's rules say that they actually have to be the employees of the ombudsman's office, not sort of an agent of theirs. And so they weren't able to hire somebody who was an expert in this kind of thing to go in there and look. Well, what happened was just, I don't know how exactly, but somebody who was a dermatologist visited the prison. I think at the request of one of the residents there. And as soon as they saw what was going on, they immediately diagnosed it. And they were like, I'm a doctor, I'm a dermatologist, I saw it, this is 100% scabies. And then as soon as they said that, suddenly it was taken seriously. So the idea with this legislation is to give them the authority to actually go and do that kind of technical investigation using potentially outside vendors. That's my recollection on it here on a Zoom call without looking at it again. Sometimes it's nice to look at these things again, but that's what I recall about it.
Okay. We have a question about how many more sessions are remaining in the lame duck.
Yep. Well, the House is meeting today, and then next week everybody is meeting Wednesday and Thursday. When I found out that we were only meeting Wednesday and Thursday and not Tuesday, I said, "What the heck's going on? Why aren't we meeting Tuesday?" We're not meeting Tuesday because that's actually the date that the Michigan Senate is used to send the electors to the Electoral College. So anyway, that's what's going on Tuesday, and so everybody's in Wednesday and Thursday. And then the Senate also has a session day scheduled for December 23rd, but I frankly doubt that that's going to happen. So we really have 2 more session days. I know that the House has over 100 items on their agenda today. We sent them a mess of legislation. Let me tell you, a lot of legislation. We sent them a lot of bills last night. And so it's going to be a very active week next week. And one of the other criminal justice issues that we were able to pass out of the Senate last night that I'm hoping gets some play in the House is this concept of productivity credits. So if anybody has ever worked on the issue of restoring good time, or if anyone has ever heard of the old system we had of disciplinary credits, the state used to have these policies that basically said if you act right in prison, you can get some time shaved off of your sentence. And most states have these kinds of things. It's an essential tool for managing the prison population. It really helps create better, safer environments inside because people are motivated to not get violations. So anyway, we passed a little bit more background. The state, though, passed a law in, I believe, 94. And it was passed via ballot initiative called Truth in Sentencing. The Truth in Sentencing ballot initiative is one of the reasons why Michigan has some of the longest prison sentences. It's one of the reasons why we have such an old prison population in Michigan. We have a lot of folks who are long-serving older folks, and a lot of it dates back to this tough on crime era. Well, anyway, the Truth in Sentencing legislation says that you have to serve your minimum no matter what else happens, no matter what else is going on. You have to serve the minimum. Well, what the productivity credits legislation would say is that going forward, folks could earn some productivity credits, and that the parole board must consider those credits when determining whether that person is eligible for parole. So it's an effort to try to allow folks to get in front of the parole board, demonstrate to the parole board what they've been doing inside and how that adds up to a successful exit. give them the chance to demonstrate their rehabilitation, and give the parole board an opportunity to call the balls and strikes, right? The parole board right now paroles just under 80% of people, but they don't parole 20% of people. And so, I think that's because they look at these cases individually, and rather than just have a blanket policy, lock them up, throw the key. Nobody gets any time off for being productive in prison, or doing good time, or going to classes, or getting a degree. You don't get any time off for that. You're going to do your minimum no matter what. That philosophy just, I don't think is as successful for public safety, because most of these folks are coming out eventually at some point. And also, I don't think it respects the individualized nature of how these cases should really be looked at by the parole board. So anyway, we passed productivity credits, Senate bills, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, 161 through 164, just last night. And so hopefully the House will be able to take action on that.
So I'm not sure we have any more questions, but I just wanted to ask, going back to a procedural thing, does each house have to have the bill for 5 days? Is that still going to be true the last couple of days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, well, here's the way it works. You've heard about the 5-day rule. It's one of the things in the Constitution that is inviolate in terms of legislative procedure. That's why we were in session until 7 a.m. this morning, or whatever it was we got out, because in order for Senate bills to still be alive and not dead and lame duck, they had to be sent to the House essentially by today in order to be able to be voted on next week, right? And the same goes for the House bills. They have a whole bunch of bills that they met on yesterday and that they're meeting on today that are House bills that if they don't pass over by today, essentially, they're dead unless we meet on the 23rd, I guess, right? Because of that 5-day rule. Once a Senate bill has gone to the House and it's laid over for 5 days, or once a House bill has gone to the Senate and it's laid over 5 days, it doesn't have to lay over for 5 days again if we start ping-ponging, right? So if one chamber makes an amendment, the other chamber has to agree to it, but they don't quite agree, they make a different amendment, and then it's got a little ping-pong, I call that. The bill goes back and forth between the chambers. It can do that immediately and even on the same day. That's not a problem, as long as you've given 5 days between introduction and the first chamber voting on it, and then 5 days between the first chamber voting and the second chamber voting. That's what the 5-day rule does. That's why we're in such kind of a breathless moment right now, trying to make sure that all of these Senate bills that, at least from my perspective as a senator, that we care about, like productivity credits, like jail WAP, those things are moving so that they're still alive for next week.
Audrey, wishing you and your family a very blessed holiday season. I think we all wish you a very, very
likewise, and I wish a great holiday season to all of you. And thank you for being interested in these issues. I don't know if you were trying to move on to other questions or wrapping up or what's going on, but I will just say thank you for caring about this stuff. I think the biggest reason why we struggle to pass criminal justice reform is that even when it's sensible, we don't have, I think, enough people who care about the interests of folks who've been accused or folks who've been adjudicated. And it's great that, there are so many people on this call and in our community broadly that do and who want a smarter system and want a system that is more attuned to public safety and more attuned to the idea that not every case is the same, not every offender is the same, and nobody should be judged by the worst thing that they ever did in their life. Let's really look at folks and not just say that rehabilitation is what we're trying for, but actually act like it.
Yeah, I didn't want to cut off if Kathy's we want to thank you, but did anybody else have any last minute questions that we didn't get to or that you want Jeff to respond to? Okay, it looks like none. And so I just wanted to thank you very much for your work. We're so appreciative in this group and in the general advocacy group for Washtenaw County. We're extremely appreciative of your work. and particularly justice issues, but we know there are more issues that you're involved in, and we're very pleased with that also. I want to thank Amelia Jane and Susan Randall and Susan Ashmore for their questions and for their organizing this with the Juvenile Justice and Justice for All Committee from the League of Women Voters. We want to thank our audience, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Zoom. And that Zoom is going to be on Wednesday, January 8th at 9 o'clock with Susan Randall as host, featuring Kevin Mitchell. He's the Director of Children's Services, Washtenaw County, and Jessica Ashmore, who's the Deputy Director of Washtenaw County Trial Court Juvenile Division. This will appear on the League of Women Voters website, and you'll get much more information about it as we move past the holidays. And again, thank you. You have any other last minute wishes for us, Jeff?
No, just thank you very much for your concern and for your advocacy. I would just remind you that all these legislators who represent you, whether it's me or anyone else, we're people here who are trying to do a good job. And when you reach out and you tell us what it is you care about, what it is you want, that helps us do our jobs. And so please continue to do that.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Really, most appreciative.
Happy holidays, everybody. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very much.